And to mix it up, I will have the panelists introduce themselves. And the first one is Stefanie Boyer. She's a PhD with Bryant University. And she loves the business of educating students to become great sellers.
Well, you introduced me.
All right. And then we have Monsieur Therrien from La Rochelle. His family immigrated 300 years ago. Tell us about yourself.
I've lost my French accent since then, so.
Okay.
My name is Therrien. I work for Anaplan. I lead a research and advisory practice for CROs, and we're a planning solution, and I consult with CROs and also revenue operations and sales operations leaders on best planning practices.
And what are you passionate about?
What am I passionate about? Well, certainly sales planning, but I love running as well. I'm on a 700-day streak of running every day.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's terrific.
Impressive.
So introduce yourself.
Hey everyone, my name's Lewis Worlidge. I'm the VP of Sales at SalesScreen, and we're a gamification platform for salespeople.
Lewis, why don't we start with you? The theme is sales acceleration. And what I'm trying to do here is to reconcile three different perspectives into one. There are many ways to accelerate sales. Why don't you start out with what's inside and not what's outside? And why is that important?
So I think a big thing that we think at SalesScreen is that the importance of motivation when it comes to sales acceleration. And I think when we're thinking about a tough economy where market conditions are tough at the moment, it's really, really important that sales fundamentals are sharper than they've ever been. And the best way to get sales fundamentals sharp is to have small bite-sized chunks of activities that people can do to make sales just that little bit easier. And I'm not talking about your high performers necessarily. This is more about the mass audience, the guys that may be struggling under the conditions that we're currently in. And I liken it a little bit to the Myers-Briggs personality types. Every organization has different personalities within it. And there's this really cool paper that's written by a guy called Professor Richard Bartle. And Richard Bartle talks about the taxonomy of players. And from SalesScreen's perspective, salespeople are players. They're gamifiers. They're like people that like to play different types of games. And the whole point about it is that Richard Bartle essentially talks about 4 different player types. And those 4 different player types are, you've got your killers, you've got your socialites, you have your explorers, and you have your achievers. And the killers, those guys, they're okay. They'll motivate themselves. But the people that you really have to look out for and the people that really need care and attention are those people in those other 3 groups. And it's about finding strategies that enable people to be motivated through different things. So rather than a linear approach to motivation, actually thinking about your audience and thinking about different ways that you can motivate based upon the needs and the skills of that person.
Well, Dana, why don't we shift from the perspective of strategy? How would you define a strategy as opposed to tactics?
Oh, that's a really good question. So the strategies is really the ultimate vision of the organization and what they're trying to achieve, and the tactics is the way they go about achieving that strategy. Right. And I think there's a lot of confusion between those two things. And I'll just say one more thing. I think what CROs and a lot of sales organizations consider to be strategy is not strategic at all.
So there are really 2 functions I want to do a little deeper dive with. One is sales, the other one is revenue operation. What's the difference between sales operation and revenue operation, and which function uses more strategy?
Well, the revenue operations growth over the last 10 years, it's now the fastest growing profession on LinkedIn. And that really is driven out of a strategic initiative to do a better job of aligning the go-to-customer functions. So from marketing to sales to customer success. Over the last 10 years, all of these functions, these operations functions have risen independently of one another. The most mature one was sales operations. And then with marketing automation platforms becoming more prominent, we had marketing operations come into the forefront. And then with customer success and Gainsight, we saw customer success operations. There's a lot of overlap between those groups, and they were operating in stovepipes, as were the organizations they supported. So now we see a need to be able to define the process and observe what's happening from lead through renewal. And that's what's driven the need for revenue operations. It was to better align all these different forces in the go-to-customer functions and drive better synergies and get them really working with one another. And the smaller companies, the under 500 million were the first ones to adopt. They did it out of necessity because they couldn't afford these expensive operations groups. And now the bigger 1 billion and plus companies are starting to adopt it because they've seen so many efficiencies that have happened. And with sales operations, was just focused pretty narrowly on the sales organization.
That makes a lot of sense. So now, Stefanie, we come full circle. We started with motivation, and now I want you to share your experience with students on how to accelerate their learning.
Sure. So, as you all saw in here, those of you, how many of you did that exercise? Just a raise hand. Oh, a lot of you did that exercise. So you knew that when you, yes, you're doing it again. That's great. Remember, it's not a drinking game. But you noticed that when you were active and when you were involved and you were thinking, you were leaning in and you were focused and you were really active and getting involved. And so what we've learned, I've been teaching for the last 21 years. I've been teaching sales and I research in sales. Specifically, I research in adult learning and how adults learn effectively. What makes adults perform better? What makes them more motivated? What makes them more committed to the organization? And what we found through our research is that often the ways that we train people, students or adults, and salespeople or adults too, often the way that we train people does not align with how people learn effectively. So when you think about designing any training programs, you've got to get people actively engaged. It's really important to make sure that people feel like the learning is relevant, right? They're not just checking off of a box. And you want to make sure that it's customized. So that way the learner feels like the training was developed just for them, that they're not wasting time learning something that they already know. And what we found is that really, if you want to get good at a skill, you have to be able to practice it.
So how much practice do you really need to be proficient? We have seen practice calls today, 8 of them. And I want to get your honest opinion. How many of those 8 could benefit from a lot more practice?
All of them, everyone. I didn't see them, so don't be offended if you were in there. Right. I was still traveling in, I think. Right. But no, I think I had to take a call. So we need a lot of practice, and it's a lot more than you think. And sadly, a lot of organizations are not prioritizing practice, because who's going to practice with that employee? Is it going to be the manager? Right? Maybe not, maybe not. But the manager doesn't have enough time to get in enough qualified practice of the conversation with feedback. It's not a practice of your pitch, it's practice having the conversation, understanding the person that you're with. So what we found, we developed a tool called Rainmakers. It's Rainmakers without the vowels, RNMKRS, and it's deployed in, I think, over 140 different colleges and universities now. We've had almost 500,000 conversations, and almost 30,000 students have gone through it. And we have seen that it takes about 30 to 40 conversations to have a significant change to really master that conversation. And so anybody, think about a really important conversation you have. You're going to be better off to be able to practice having that conversation, practice the stressful things that are happening, what the pushback might be, the strategies of success.
I find it fascinating. Louis, maybe you can tell us, how can you get salespeople more motivated to go along that path and say, I want to have 30 practice conversations and I want to really do better. I want to be the best I can be?
It's a really good question. I think the key for me is comes back to a point that Stefanie made a little bit earlier on, which is that things need to be visual. People need to understand what's expected of them and what's needed of them to get to those points. But it can't just be read from a script. It can't just be a case of you going through a training session where there is no engagement within that training session. It has to be fun, it has to be engaging, and that person has to be getting something out of it as they're going. So the motivation has to come from creating something that's interesting to them and also appeals to their needs as a learner or as a user of or as an engaged person within that process. So one thing that we always do is we try and put together different styles of games and competitions for people so that as they're learning through bite-sized chunks, they're actually keyed in on the small fundamentals that are going to get them to their end goal. So rather than it being this huge task that they have to reach the top of a mountain, they've got bite-sized chunks that they can just take down piece by piece by piece, and they relate to their skills. So there are different types of competition. For example, we talked a little bit earlier on about Bartle's taxonomy on players. It might be a competition that relates to a social element for socialites, or it could be something that's a competition for your killers, the people that really kind of go out there and just make things happen. They just want to win, win, win. So it's about coming up with a bunch of different strategies that essentially motivate individuals, but through games.
Can I add something onto that? Of course. Yes. So a gamification, it's huge. We played the game earlier. I gamify everything. I don't like jogging, and so if I have to go do it or go walk, I'm like, I'm just gonna walk to that post, right? And so I'm just constantly gamifying that. So we just added in game mechanics into Rainmaker. So we compared last spring versus the previous spring before we had all these leaderboards and all this gamification, and it actually doubled engagement. So people did twice as many practice conversations as they did prior to having that. So game mechanics, I mean, it's huge.
Louis, I'll add too, at Anaplan, we sell into many different personas because we sell into the office of the CFO, into the chief marketing officer, the chief revenue officer, as well as HR and supply chain. So our salespeople have to be adept at having those conversations into many different areas of the business. And they have a tendency to gravitate towards telling stories that they can relate to personally. So salespeople have a preference to sell to other sellers. So they gravitate towards selling our sales solution because they can relate to those stories and they can express some of the same pain that we're trying to solve for some of our customers. So I think what's tough for salespeople is when they're trying to tell someone else's story. Yeah. That's really difficult. But when they can tell a story that they can relate to, I think they're much more successful. It's much more authentic.
Yeah, absolutely. Shameless plug here, but Remy from SalesScreen did his presentation earlier, and his pitch was all about how he actually uses Pelotons and how he sat on the Peloton.
Right.
And it resonates, right? And it's a true story, by the way. If anyone wants to go and speak to Remy, he does have a picture of himself on a Peloton that he can share with you. So it wasn't just a sales story, but that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Well, I want to add to that. I think that success is all about
Microphone.
Success is all about creating the right mindset, the right skill set, and deploying the right tool set. So maybe we talk about the tool set. When you look at the revenue operation, obviously you have a different tool set when you look at a sales operation. So can you enlighten us, what should CEOs be thinking about when it comes to shopping for a tool set that is not just a tool set, but extends the strategic thought of the organization and also helps the organization to be more agile and responsive and data-driven?
I think many of the speakers today have spoken about the proliferation of all these different technologies that are supposed to be enabling sales efficiency and effectiveness, and we've not really seen an uptick in sales performance because of it. And now companies are going through and they're evaluating the expenses and the investments they've made in these tools and figuring out that they're paying for duplicative capabilities. They'll have an AI solution that's meant for the SDR function, but that's spilling into the enterprise solution, and they've got forecasting solutions and incentive compensation solutions, and they're overpaying for a lot of these different things. So the first thing revenue operations is doing is trying to rationalize these investments and then decide on the ones that are producing the best outcome. So revenue operations is really working across these different functions to try to optimize the investment, and we're starting to see a lot of people scaling back in what they've invested in the past. The one thing that they've ignored is sales planning, and it's starting to become a lot more prevalent today because we did a study with the Sales Management Association. Anaplan did a couple months ago, and we found that companies that are poor at planning have a propensity to focus more on forecasting. So they're bad at sales planning, so they're really good at setting targets that are poor, and they know that they're poor, so then they have a tendency to focus on forecasting so that they can play catch up for the rest of the year. Right. And if they would just focus on the fundamentals of getting the plans right in the first place, there'd be less pressure on every individual month and quarter and year to try to achieve those numbers.
So how do you help sales leaders become aware that what they don't know is actually hurting them?
and I've been doing this for a long time. I've led revenue operations, sales operations. I think that poor sales plans, unachievable quotas, unequal quotas, unequitable quotas are a pain that sales organizations have just become accustomed to living with for a very long period of time. They figured maybe only 40 or 50% of their salespeople would achieve their numbers, and they would have a high attrition as a result of that. And now we're starting to understand that we do have a obligation to plan at the individual seller level with the same level of due diligence as we do at the CRO level. So there's just a lot more data and a lot more information that needs to go into that process.
Right.
If you've got a sales organization of 2,000 people, that's 3,000 plans once you start thinking about all the overlays.
Right.
And are we really focused on getting them right for all 3,000 people? We haven't been up until now, and we have to be.
So Stefanie, what is your perception of optimizing a sales organization beyond improving salespeople?
What is my perception of it? Like, is it
What
something that's happening
what is
right now?
the best way to think about it?
Oh, optimizing it. I mean, really focusing on the people and understanding the customers and getting them to learn how to have better conversations so that they can constantly adapt.
Right.
Really being
So
pliable.
what if I said that it's probably a better idea to look at 2 data points. One is, what is our product really capable of? Or what is our solution really be capable of? What can it be applied? But the second data point is, I want to know what is the addressable market? And what I find is, in my conversations with a lot of people that do not understand the concept of addressable market, or they don't make it part of their strategy. And the companies that I look at that are rapidly growing, like ServiceNow, Bill McDermott talks about the addressable market from a perspective where there is really almost infinite potential. So if you don't have that mindset, that motivation to begin with, you're not looking for it. So the question is, how do you let go of those blinders and see the world the way it really is, and not through the eyes of the competition or the competencies of people, but truly understand what is possible?
Some of the things you can do, I know at the university, all of our freshmen go through a design thinking program, where they have to use creative thinking in order to solve problems in a way that they've never done that before. And so you can do simple exercises with Post-it notes, where you start to ideate different uses of products and different applications, and you have to look at the outliers. You know, people that are super users and how they're using it, and people that are just non-users and why they're not using it, and then you kind of start from there and you work your way in.
Cool. What's your take?
I think it's a really challenging question, but the reason I think it's challenging is because you talk, and I completely understand, about the breadth, about what a product can do and how you go to market and present your product in lots of different ways, and that personalization is key. But then I think one of the challenges that we face as an organization is that our product is quite flexible in the sense that you can use it for lots of different player types, you can use it for lots of different ways in which you build a sales team. But actually a challenge for us when we sell our product is making that message really concise and specific. And I think asking the right questions, finding out what our prospects are actually looking for from the product is important. But I also think it's really important that we're really clear in terms of what our product is. So finding those outliers are really important, but actually then honing in on what that value is to the prospect, making sure that a company understands exactly what they're going to get from the program so they know they're actually going to get some ROI from it. Because right now we keep hearing about it. All day we've been hearing about, how companies are pumping the brakes, or they're far less trusting than they used to be. And it's about finding that level of trust or giving them something that gives them an ROI enough that they actually want to buy.
I also want to sort of challenge you thinking about how to think about acceleration. And what comes to my mind is accelerating awareness. So how can you use your word, customer conversations? How can you become more aware of the customer conversation that your salespeople have, and how to harvest those ideas and then integrate them into a sales plan? Efficiency
is really important when you're doing this. So there are technologies out there that allow you to they call it activity capture, right? So we're getting to a world of AI now where salespeople should not have to perform certain administrative tasks for themselves. And one of those would be logging contacts in your CRM, logging meetings, identifying who you spoke to and what their roles are. So you've got these technologies now that capture all that activity by integrating into the meeting client, the email client, the conversation client, capturing all that information, logging it all for them, adding it to the CRM and analyzing it and telling them whether or not what they're doing is the right thing, whether they're speaking to the right people, and whether they're having the right conversations. So it really becomes an instant coaching mechanism that gives them immediate feedback to let them know what they're doing is working or not working. And I think those things are critical. That's the critical technology that companies should have now, is taking the administrative burden off the backs of these salespeople and then providing them actionable insights on an individual level where they don't have to wait for a conversation between them and their coach to figure out whether they're doing the right thing or not. It's immediate feedback.
So my final question is this. What do you see, and Stefanie, think about this first. Every day we have experiences in sales, and we digest those experiences, and we act on our insight. So how is AI going to change that picture where AI is going to deliver to us better insights that actually exceed our capacity to understand, but we trust that process or that insight and make better decisions? So how do you see the future, maybe just 2 years from now? Do you think we can sort of design experiences that lead to better conversations?
Absolutely, we're doing it now.
Okay.
We're designing experiences now that you can practice and have better conversations. AI, some of the tools are a little bit rough right now, but they're getting better. And I think it's fascinating that before, when a salesperson would leave, you would lose a lot of institutional knowledge, or it just wasn't shared in the first place. And so now we have access to this, and we have tools to help us summarize and understand what's happening, and that can be shared across our team. So it's exciting to see where the future is, and we can take that information happening in conversations, and we can use that and filter it into our training programs, so that way we can train people so that they're not churning through customer lists or potential leads while they're thinking about practicing on the customer. Now they can practice a real quality conversation before they get to the customer.
Louis, what's your take, Louis, on is there a possibility that we can use AI to nag us to be more motivated?
Absolutely. I think you probably knew I was going to say that, right? I think the possibilities are endless. At the moment, it's a very manual process, and what we try and do at SalesScreen is we try and automate that process to make it as simple for sales revenue folk as we possibly can. But more and more, we're going to see this process just become more and more automated. Very exciting.
Awesome. Dana, how is AI going to improve revenue operations?
Well, for one thing, you can do predictive planning now. So you can gather all this information, you can see what's working, and then you can start to build a sales plan from the bottom up. So not just from last year plus growth, but you can start to look at the amount of activity that it's taken to build pipeline, to build velocity in that pipeline, to influence the close rates, to influence the win rates. And then you can start to build a ground-up production plan that's going to set quotas for you based upon individual markets and individual people and their individual capabilities. And these individual plans won't just be your quota anymore, but it'll start to give you targets on what your pipeline should be, when it should be at certain levels, when you should be at certain stages in the sales process, if you're going to be effective. So if you just think about the quotas that have been set, say you're going to run a marathon this year, but the plans should be scripted in a way that they tell you what you need to do every day in order to excel at that marathon. So here's your objectives for today, and if you do this today, you're going to excel at the marathon 12 months from now.
Well, my AI is just telling me that we are going to have a 15-minute break. Give it up for Dana, Stefanie, and Louis.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Awesome.